Welcome to another round of our RPC podcast here. Today we wanted to take an opportunity to talk about Christianity in the MGTOW movement. So this is something I know we've alluded to it in the past. We've talked about it vaguely in other podcasts without directly confronting the issue. And, we're going to acknowledge up front, we may not be the most knowledgeable and best people to be talking about this, but it does come up enough in our circles that we can't ignore it. It has to be addressed at some point. So with that being said, I'll leave an open invitation to anybody who wants to put in the comments, hey, you don't like what we're saying here? Fine, put it in the comments of the YouTube video. We will see if we can address some of those things maybe in a future podcast. We're even open to the idea of hosting guest speakers who might be able to join us and represent your views more fairly. Same thing applies to our video on the black pill. But in the meantime, why don't you guys tell me, what is your understanding of what MGTOW is in the first place and how it gets represented in Christian circles?
So when I hear MGTOW, and I will be the first to admit that I'm not extraordinarily well versed in this movement, so I'm probably going to be upsetting a bunch of people with this, but it seems a lot like a bunch of guys who are saying, well, you can't fire me, I quit. And so I'm sure this is not representative of all of them, but it seems like in the casual encounters that I've had with guys who avow MGTOW as the way to go, it seems like a bunch of guys who are struggling with women in general, and are not exactly having women beat down their doors and say, no, please be with me. I so desperately want you. Well, be gone, thought, you are beneath me because you are a woman. And, for whatever reason, it just doesn't come off that way. So I think that there's a lot of upset guys who are drawn toward this movement because they're not having success, and it's a lot easier to rightly identify a lot of the hard positions that men have found themselves in and kind of the way the deck has been stacked against them in the world, and be upset about it, and then define themselves in a movement that is all defined by the antithesis. It's not a movement that says, really, we're positively about men. It's we're really against women is how it comes off. And again, I'm sure I'm pissing off people by saying it, but it doesn't seem like it's asserting a lot of positivity and giving guys a lot of solutions. It's mostly get away from the problem rather than solve yourself and learn to contend with the problem in a way that's productive.
So in that, do you see a disconnect? And I'm just looking at the MGTOW subreddit real fast here. So this is reddit.com/r/MGTOW. And on their sidebar, they really don't put a lot of description of who they are. What they do say is, and I'll note first and foremost, they say that they are a community of volunteers, that they are not an official organization. So bear that in mind. But their top of their subreddit does say, we are men going our own way by forging our own identities and paths to self-defined success, cutting through collective ideas of what a man is. And so by their own definition on their subreddit, they're saying we are not a community that's defined about our negativity toward women, but rather about our collective ideas of what it means to be a man on our own, independently of how women would operate or function. It's kind of what I'm gathering. But at the same time, virtually every post that I'm seeing, especially if you look at the top posts over time, are complaining about women rather than trying to positively identify masculinity. So is that kind of what you're basically saying? Hey, you say this about men, that you say one thing about we define ourselves by our masculinity, but if we stop looking at what you say and at what you do, all of the posts and comments really show us what you're about.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at today, there's one of the hot posts there. It's no nagging, no rules, peace and quiet, freedom, and I've never been happier. And it's a picture of some guy's rather weak gaming setup with his cat and his lawn chair, apparently, and he's eating it looks like peas out of a can. And so, here's a post that's upvoted at least 233 times. So it's not like it's viral, but it's definitely been seeing some attention. It's on the front page when I pull it up. And so here we have some celebration of, okay, here's a guy who's got it figured out. There's no nagging, no rules, but it's a guy, with his lawn chair gaming station. Is this really what we're saying is a better alternative? And so what I guess my problem with the MGTOW thing tends to be is they're saying, oh, life under the rule of women or under the feminine paradigm is awful. So men should divorce themselves of that voluntarily so they can live their own awful lives on their own awful terms. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding this and these people are actually super duper happy, but I don't see a lot of that from people who are coming from the MGTOW movement who are at least vocal about it. And maybe that's part of the problem is you have a vocal minority who are just out there spreading their, whatever thoughts about it. Whereas the people who are really benefiting from this aren't out there talking about women in negative context all the time. And I don't have a problem with guys talking about the negative influences of women. We do plenty. I'm certainly not going to counter signal a certain degree of rational misogyny. That said, it's not terribly productive. It doesn't really push guys forward. And I just don't see that from a lot of people that I've interacted with that have, found the MGTOW movement to be the answer to their problems. It seems incomplete because they're still frustrated and fired up.
So let me ask this then. Have either of you guys met somebody who identifies with the MGTOW movement and does so with an attitude of serenity about their life?
I do not know anybody personally in my own life that I've met face to face that would identify with the MGTOW movement at all. So
I would extend that to the online community, of course, right?
I've seen comments, but as far as have I interacted in a meaningful way, more than just a fleeting comment or two, not really. I've seen more people that are oriented towards Black Pill than I have towards MGTOW. And I think there's some similarities there and there's a lot of differences. Separating those two can be a challenge depending on how the person presents themselves.
Yeah, I've met a few guys in real life who have self-identified as MGTOW sorted guys, and I wouldn't say that they live lives of serenity or at peace with their decisions. And part of it is they struggled with women to start with, and they were frustrated by not only the women they interacted with, but the world around them that seems to really push that behavior and to influence women to worsen themselves in a lot of ways. And they're arguments are good. I agree with more or less what they're saying. Yeah, the world is not doing us a favor by pushing women into these, very narcissistic corners of the internet beyond other things. So I feel for them at that point, but they're still defining their position on the, I guess their ideology in a negative way, in a way against women rather than for themselves. And so one guy that I'm thinking of, good guy, he's I wouldn't say he's got it all figured out, but more or less he just straight up is like, I just don't like women enough to pursue them, and so he's not. And I can respect that. I don't think that it's really going to lead to a lot of happiness down the road, because I think his struggles can be overcome, and I think that he's just unwilling to put in the work to do it right now, and he's slowly coming around on that, realizing that the bed he has made is not as comfortable as he thought it was. But in the meantime, he's wasted a lot of time coming around to those conclusions. And just one point I'm looking at here that's kind of, I guess this is it illustrates the point. So here on the MGTOW on the front page, one of the high upvoted comments right now is a post about this guy who had a transformation picture, and he went from chubby kind of neckbeard looking guy to a pretty fit looking guy. And the title of the post is, I posted this a few months ago in a throwaway account. I'm posting about it again because nobody believes that MGTOWs are capable of working out 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, not even among our own. Well, here's the proof. And okay, if this guy's working out 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, I don't buy it because that physique does not look like it. Secondly, I don't know why that's a defensive issue. I've never heard people accuse MGTOWs of not working out. Like, it seems like a bizarre sort of self-validation thing there that is a strange hang-up. So the stereotype must exist for a reason.
So let me go back to something you said earlier. You made a comment that made it sound like that by going MGTOW, that they have sacrificed a level of happiness in their lives. Does that mean that you would suggest that happiness in a man's life comes from women?
No, but I think of happiness as a well-rounded, well-lived life that includes women. And I don't necessarily mean in a sexual or romantic way, but I think a lot of these guys pretty much scorn women entirely. And Jesus didn't even do that. There's no biblical example of a guy who's just like completely, well, screw women entirely. They, in various capacities, they're a part of society. And I will grant there are a lot of women nowadays that are not worth spending time on, and that's fine. That's kind of beside the point in a way. But a lot of guys, I think, they lack for not having any kind of feminine energy in their life. And, by scorning the feminine entirely, they're rejecting a part of what it is to be human, I think. And so I think that, their happiness is related to that, but it's certainly not founded on it.
So let me bring the conversation back to you then, Chuck, because I know that you had just commented before we started recording that somebody actually had made the comment to you that Jesus was MGTOW, right? Tell me a little bit about what that happened, how that context came up, and what your response was.
Well, somebody had posted a comment on one of our posts that said MGTOW is freedom. And I had responded that it's not freedom. It seems to me like it's the fear of consequences of a relationship with the woman. So therefore it's kind of a slavery to fear. And that's kind of how it comes across to me. It's not so much pro man as it is anti-women and fearing what women can do and the consequences. And I said, true freedom comes from a single-hearted devotion to God, rejecting the world for his will. And somebody commented and said, well, can't men be both? And I said, no, because they're at odds with each other. Jesus was not MGTOW. And so Jesus was and is pro-God. Christianity is pro-God. Jesus is a man going God's way, and he is the way, the truth, and the life. And I said, can men avoid relationships and serve God wholeheartedly? Absolutely. But you can't be pro-gospel and anti-women at the same time. And so if it wasn't for what appears to be, as a non-MGTOW person myself, an anti-woman stance, in many cases, the comments I've seen scattered online in different places they're vehemently anti-woman. It wouldn't be, I wouldn't see it like that, but that's unfortunately the MGTOW that I've seen, and the statement on their subreddit does not reflect the reality that I see in the comments and the attitudes of the people that claim to be it, unfortunately, and that does not reflect Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was not anti-woman or anti-anybody. He gave everybody a chance.
I heard that humming. It sounded like you were going to speak Oz, but I will step in instead. So, Chuck, one of the things that you commented was the fear of that MGTOW is related to the fear of consequences of men's interactions or relationships with women. Can you describe that a little bit more, what that looks like?
Well, from what I've seen, divorce, rape, and being cheated on, just general problems and contention in relationships. And let's be honest, even whether you're dating or whether you're married, there's contention in relationships. And a lot of people, especially in our society, get to the point where they're like, yeah, I don't really want to deal with that. And rather than look at what they are contributing to that and say, what can I do to fix myself to lessen or eliminate this problem? They point the finger at everything and everyone else and say, these are my problems. This person is my problem. Women are my problem. And so therefore, if I avoid the problem, I don't have to deal with it. And I think it lacks introspection. The people that I see online, they're living anything but fulfilling lives from the things that I see them right. Now, I don't know their whole lives, but that's what I see.
So I think at best, MGTOW serves as kind of like a glorified monk mode, a really hardcore monk mode. I think the few guys that I know of who flirted with MGTOW for a while and did that thing and came out of it, basically what happened is they got really ticked off about women and the way the world was and how everything sucks, and they got all down about it, and then they feel, okay, well, I'm just going to separate myself from them entirely. And then they worked on bettering themselves, and then they decided they were going to pursue their own agenda, and they were going to, make themselves and their mission and whatever that was a priority. And then lo and behold, they were healthier, they were more successful, they had more interesting things going on, they were a more interesting person, and suddenly women were interested in them. And then they stopped being MGTOW because suddenly their problem wasn't the problem anymore. They had already solved it. And so in a way, it's kind of like this bizarre codified monk mode, but without a goal at the end. And so it seems like MGTOW is really aimless. And so it just doesn't seem like a very productive way of going. And if somebody wants to prove me wrong and show me the example of the like really successful, highly attractive, has it all figured out kind of guy who has decided that he is going to boycott women, great, like that would be an interesting example. But I sincerely doubt that it's representative of most people who fall into the MGTOW mentality.
So let me ask on that then, is the MGTOW a permanent state that guys are saying, hey, I'm committed to this? Or do you see it more as something that only exists until they have a counterpoint experience, where they say, you know, I'm MGTOW for now because I don't have positive relationships with women, but, you know, once I do, then all of a sudden, you know, oh, I'm not as committed to that ideal as I thought I was.
So I think MGTOW is the sexual marketplace equivalent of libertarianism. A lot of people make a pit stop there for a while and they think it's the answer. And then they realize that it actually doesn't work in the real world. And then they seek other answers that are better suited for practical application. So I think that's probably what I would say in that case. Is it is a lot of times perceived to be a destination in and of itself, and really it's a layover.
Interesting. How long do you think guys need to stay there before they realize that?
I think a lot of guys won't. I think a lot of guys will continue to believe that it's a destination and be miserable in the meantime. I think guys who get out of the MGTOW movement are probably doing so in spite of it, not because of it. Like, I think the best case scenario is a guy who gets burnt and instead of going the red pill route goes MGTOW and just says, you know, I'm going to just swear off women. They're not helpful. The society is aimed to ruin them and ruin us by our relations. So I'm just going to go pursue my own agenda. If he does that well enough and it's a worthwhile agenda, like eventually he's probably going to get his life sorted out enough that women are going to start being interested in him. And I think that biology takes over at that point. I think that we're hardwired for human companionship and female attention. And so I think then you have a very different argument. The guy who comes to MGTOW who has no prospects is a very different, he's saying no to something very different than the guy who otherwise has a lot of, you know, supermodels hitting on him and blowing up his Tinder or whatever. That guy's probably never going to end up in MGTOW to begin with, because he's rejecting something totally different. He's rejecting a system, if he is at all going MGTOW, that is working for him, but he's rejecting it for ideological reasons. Somebody can end up from the other direction, embracing MGTOW because they're rejecting feminism and all the rest of it for ideological reasons, and also it's not working for them.
So you mentioned in that comment there that some guys will, instead of going the red pill route, what would it mean for a MGTOW to go the red pill route instead? Why is there a connection between the red pill and the MGTOWs? You know, why do you, I know on RPC, for example, we'll get a number of guys. And in fact, we just had somebody 3 days ago make a post on Ask RPC. Hi, like your sub. Hi from MGTOW. And he says, I'm not even religious, not a Christian. But he does love the Bible's approach to male and female interactions. But like, what is it about the red pill that draws MGTOW specifically to comment? And a follow-up to that, and I don't know if you want to incorporate this into your answer as well, but you know, just the same way that there's a correlation between how the red pill and MGTOWs kind of overlap in a lot of things. What is the actual boundary of the overlap between the MGTOWs and the black pill, and where do we draw that line?
So I think that if I were to be drawing a boundary between the two movements, I would say it's the boundary of intent. I think that the MGTOW movement, the guys who land up in it, they have tried, or at least they have avowed, to not have intentions toward relationships with women. They are scorning that altogether. Whereas I think the red pill approach is to say, yes, I still want to have relationships with women, but I want to have them on productive terms. I want to have them in a way that is beneficial to me, and not in a way that is going to get me scalped. And so the intention behind the movements, if you can call it that, the differences between the ideologies is really that intention. What are you trying to accomplish? And so the MGTOW guy, I'm trying to self-fulfill apart and completely independent from women. The red pill approach, I think, is no, women are going to be a part of life, and I need to learn how to manage those relationships and manage myself in that productively.
I think it's about hope. I think the red pill offers a glimmer of hope for people that have looked at the situation, both from a MGTOW perspective and a black pill perspective, and said, there's no hope. Everything is completely screwed. And then they come across red pill and they say, I never considered a lot of this stuff. And some of this is biblical. And there's, maybe I'm not particularly religious, but there could be some good things about religion. And so I think a lot of them may not be convinced or swayed, but they're curious because they see something in our sub that they hadn't seen anywhere else, and it provides that glimmer of hope.
Yeah. This is a poor analogy, so you'll have to forgive it. You think about a dangerous hobby of some variety, mountaineering, skydiving, whatever, scuba diving, cave jumping, I don't know, whatever it is, the dangerous hobby. There's an approach that guys can take, and they can say, well, look at that, it's dangerous. Guys who do that are likely to get injured and totally scalped out of this thing. So my approach is to not do that. And so I am the anti-mountaineerer. I am the anti skydiving guy. It's a weird way to define yourself. Whereas somebody who's like, well, I really think that cave diving is really interesting and I'd like to do that, but I'd like to do it in a way that's not going to get me killed. So I'm going to study what goes into making that successful. And, there's going to be risk associated with it, but I'm going to learn some risk management and learn how to cut my losses and not get my butt killed in something stupid. And so I think there's a part of it is what Chuck brought up beforehand, that fear-based approach to it is, well, that sounds dangerous, so I'm just going to absolve myself from any kind of risk by totally avoiding it altogether. And it's just kind of a pussy way to go about it. I mean, our manly ancestors didn't say, well, going out and sailing across the ocean and discovering new lands, it sounds pretty risky, so I'm just not going to. A lot of them did, but you know what? They didn't make the history books.
Yeah, why not? If you're looking at skydiving, why not take a class, learn how to jump, learn how to fold the parachute, and have your best chance? Really, I see a lot of people that claim that it's the best way to go and they don't want anything to do with women. But when you talk with them, if you get them to open up a little and you chat with them online, because that's where my interactions have been, so I'm limited to that as far as MGTOW, they don't really want to be alone. Really. They just see being alone as the only solution to not being screwed over. I have yet to talk with a guy that says, no, I'm really okay with this. I've never been in a relationship. I don't want a relationship, and I'm not scared. I'm fine. I'm really good this way. I'm sure there's those people out there, but I haven't met them. Most men eventually want to have a wife.
So let me ask things from this angle. In light of the way that we talk about all women are like that, right? There's these set of traits that women tend to have that we would say have always been true, right? That it's not just today, but you could look 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or all the way back to Adam and Eve and say, this is just how God created men. It's how he created women. And it's always been like this. So in that, do you see that the MGTOW movement is a reaction to the way that women are and all women are like that tendencies? Or is it a modern movement that's a reaction to the modern laws and political-cultural climate? Or is it a historical movement or a response to historical issues?
I would see it as a modern reactionary movement. And I think I qualify that by saying, I think that the way that men interact with the world nowadays is very different than they had in the past. In that, I think men in the past had a much less they didn't think as much about women in terms of what they thought about things, what they wanted out of life, what they said, and how it was going to make them feel bad. There wasn't the HR department breathing down your neck. So, I mean, part of it is it was a man's world. And so men were concerned with other guys' opinions, not the opinions of females. And so I think that in general, there was just a lot more, I guess, MGTOW men doing their own thing sort of mentality that just permeated the world. And I think that what we're seeing in the MGTOW movement is a reaction to the modern undoing of that. But the problem is they don't have solutions to get us back there. And that might be one of those, like the toothpaste has been squeezed and it's not going back, or at least I haven't seen a way, barring like total gospel transformation of the world. Hey, that post mill. But at the same time, it's still not positing anything future looking. I don't see it as a hopeful movement, kind of what Chuck was talking about beforehand. And so it's a very thin line between MGTOW and black pill.
So you would say then that historically, it's historical to the degree that men have always
gone their own way.
Most phases of time had the ability to go their own way, and that our modern cultural climate is the first time when we really are losing that option.
Well, right. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, because I think that in the past, you didn't have society without men. And now with, the rise of technology, automation, and really the outsourcing to, other countries, from the West, the roles that men used to play to keep society going, you really, there's a kind of an intentional engineering away from the needing of men, a social engineering. You even look at like the welfare state that has been developed. If anything, men now are very superfluous other than like tax battery, basically. And so there's a lot of women out there who really don't need men to help their lives get along, and that's kind of like the feminist goal marker at the end zone that they've been shooting for. And so I think that there's a degree to which there's men feeling obsolete, because in many ways they've allowed themselves to become made obsolete. And so yes, men could kind of go their own way because they had greater social value. And I think the thrust of the last century has really been a devaluing of the role of men and masculine attributes in the public sphere.
So let me ask this then, just as a logical philosophical premise, if men are obsolete today, what is the problem with feminism and the devaluation of men?
Everyone is miserable under it.
Everyone or just men?
No, I've not met happy feminists.
I know you have a good answer to that one, so I'm trying to tease that out of you.
Feminism does not make women happy. It does not make men happy. It is an inversion of the created order, and the more that we align with the way God designed this thing to work, the more happy and the more joyous people become. It's a matter of telos. It's a matter of function. So if something was designed to function a certain way, your car runs on diesel and you start pouring some weird substance into it, things break down pretty quickly. And that's what we've done as a society, is we've decided, things aren't designed. We've embraced secularism writ large. And so because things weren't designed and there's not really an intention behind any of it, we can just play fast and loose with what things are. So what's a man, what's a woman? It's up to your interpretation. And are either of them more or less valuable in certain spheres? Who knows? And of course, the whole thing breaks down and everyone's miserable. And so, yeah, feminism is not making women happy, and it's not making men happy. So is feminism right? No.
Yeah, it definitely contributes to the breakdown, not only of relationships, but of society. You can look around the world and see all the problems. And am I going to point the finger and say that that's all due to feminism? No, of course not. But it is a contributing factor, because men used to be the gatekeepers that held a lot of that back. Now men have been legally prevented from doing a lot of that. And a lot of men have just said, go ahead, have at it. And we see we're reaping the results. In fact, I just saw a news article the other day where they're trying to push a bill or an amendment through the Senate that will require women to sign up for the draft.
Yeah, there's a big news story that broke either today or yesterday about, celebrating the accomplishments of Kurdish fighters against ISIS, an all-women elite unit. It seems a strange thing that we're doing that when we pretty much piss on the Kurds all the time anyways and don't help them with anything. We're going to celebrate their all-women elite fighting force, but I digress into politics. But it's interesting to me. Yeah, you're right. There's this weird push of like utter egalitarianism, and yet you have the MMA fighter, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, who fought the transgender MMA fighter, and he absolutely like destroyed her and broke her skull, and her after fight report was essentially, I've never felt so overpowered in my life. And it's idiocy writ large, but it's all a political idiocy to drive a certain agenda, and it's a deconstructionary effort. And again, like, I get why MGTOW people feel the way they do, that the deck is stacked against them. I get why black pill guys feel that way. The deck is stacked against you. Like, I will acknowledge that, but that doesn't absolve you of the manly responsibility to take risk and reap the rewards and to exercise dominion. I mean, it's there. So running from the fight doesn't change it. You just lose slowly and maybe in a little bit more Cheeto covered comfort.
A lot of that is because we have not exercised dominion the way we were created to and the way we were commanded to. Um, Men are to blame for a large portion of that because we've sat back, we got comfortable. You know, what is the saying? Uh, Hard times create strong men create good times creates weak men. We're there.
So this is where I find it interesting in modern society, though, because I love that quote, right? And so then the finishing of the quote is that weak men create hard times, and therefore you cycle back to hard times creating strong men, right? So the theory is that it should always cycle back to the point that men will stand up and be strong again. Some of the MGTOWs, to some degree, are trying to be that movement, as well as the red pills and to a lesser degree the black pills. But all of that being said, what strikes me about the modern age is the tactics that I see happening in the political culture, where it seems as if by trying to feminize men and keep us from becoming strong, they're basically creating a culture where no matter how hard the times get, instead of men becoming strong in order to bring back the good times, which would be antithetical to the liberal agenda, we instead see them saying, oh, no, we're going to make sure that the hard times are just going to push men to be even more effeminate by the way that we've raised them and conditioned them, and therefore the strong men will never have the chance to rise up again, and we can break the cycle.
We haven't hit that line yet where it flips. When we do, it's going to hit the fan. It's going to be really ugly. It's going to be really bad, and there's going to be a lot of people fighting, and men will be strong again. It'll be gladiator type stuff. It might take a while, but society is really got to go a lot farther down the tubes than it has right now for men to be pushed into a corner enough where it's either fight or die. So far, most of the fighting's online. Most of the fighting is words. Most of the fighting can still be done on your couch with a laptop or a phone covered in Cheeto dust while you wage a war of words. And as long as that's still the case, there's no real fight. It'll happen, but it's going to be ugly when it does happen. And when it does happen, strong men will rise up again, and the world is going to suck, and there'll be a lot less feminists because the girls are all going to grow their hair out and they're going to say, oh, save me, there's a horde of bandits coming and they want to do really bad things to me and I don't have anybody to protect me. And when that happens, things will turn around. Unfortunately, it's going to be a while.
Oh man, you're reminding me of a lot of my favorite dystopian teen novels.
Well, unfortunately, they were supposed to be fiction, not instruction manuals, just like 1984, just like Animal Farm, just like Brave New World. Wow, we're seeing it come true before our eyes. We're seeing the Bible come true before our eyes. God sent them strong delusions so that they would believe the lie. We're there.
Well, I have so much to say, and most of it would probably be redactable, so I'm not going to. But one thing I will say,
Say it.
Not with the time we have left here. So one thing I will say, though, is the church at large is emasculating men. And I'm talking about conservative churches too. Look at how guys in the Bible are talked about. If you look at some of the patriarchs in the Old Testament, you look at David, you look at Samson, we've done a great job tearing down our own statues. BLM and the rest of the left didn't have to for us. Christians did it themselves. Oh, David, yeah, he was this awesome warrior. He was, an intellectual. He was a leader of his people. He was all this awesome stuff and a great masculine man. Oh, but Bathsheba, so he's canceled. Oh, Samson, super masculine. He fought. He, defended God's people. Great. Oh, except for Delilah. So, you know what? He's canceled too. You go down the line and the church canceled all of our heroes. And they say, well, the only hero worth emulating is Jesus. Well, guess what? Jesus and us, yeah, we have the same overarching mission with different battles to fight. I mean, we obviously should emulate Christ, and he is the hero of the scriptures. But insofar as Paul emulated Christ, we should emulate him. And so far as David emulated Christ, we should emulate him as well. And so we've torn down a ton of our heroes in the church and told the guys, well, no, don't be like them. And we wonder why we have a bunch of pansies in church.
Right. So we can't end this podcast without addressing this. And you're talking about Paul and Jesus. So let's hop right into that real fast before we get to our last couple minutes. Matthew 19:11. is basically where Jesus, he talks about the difficulty of marriage and divorce and you can't get remarried and all that. And the apostles say, well, if that's the case, then, isn't it better just not to marry at all? And Jesus says, hey, if anybody can't accept that, he should. And then you have the same thing in 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul says, I wish you were all as I am, single, that is. And he talks about how it's better for somebody to remain single. Not that it's wrong to get married. He says it's not wrong. It's good to be married, but it's better to remain single. How do we reconcile that with saying, hey, the MGTOWs have missed the point?
Because I don't think those were normative instructions for the church, and that the church continues on with how God's family has always grown, which is primarily through carnal means, in the sense of more Christians are alive today born than they were converted by other forms of preaching and conversion. I don't think that we see in the New Testament a rejection of God's normal movement in the world through families. So I think that to say what Paul and Jesus were saying there upended all of the rest of the biblical tradition in Scripture is missing the continuity between the testaments, and I don't think we have time to get into all of that.
I'll go one step further. I'll go one step further and make it a little more personal. To anybody who's listening who may be MGTOW or thinking about it or anything close to that, I'll just ask you, is it what you really want? Are you really wanting to live the rest of your life single with no women around? Are you really wanting to separate yourself for either your own purposes, if you're secular, or for the purposes of God, if you're a Christian? If so, admirable. But ask yourself this: is it really what you're doing? Or are you just like, look, everything's so screwed, I don't even want to try, and I know I'm just going to end up in a bunch of trouble if I even try. It's just easier not to try because we're past the point of no return, and there's just no point. If that's where you're at, then this is for you, because there is hope. That's the difference. That's how you know. Some people have the gift of singleness, as churchianity calls it. Some people can stay single, serve God, and be totally happy doing so. Most people, especially most men, are created by God to be married, have a wife, have kids, reproduce, spiritual reproduction, physical reproduction. To deny that is to deny how you were created by God. You need to think about your motivations for what you're doing. That's not for me to say. And hey, maybe I don't understand it all, but you need to think about why you're actually doing this, and you need to be really, really honest with yourself about your reasons for wanting to be single.
Right. So it goes back to the age-old question that is always one of my favorite to ask. How's that working out for you? If you get to a point where you are taking a MGTOW direction and it is working out for you and you're saying, yeah, man, this has been the best life ever. I'm so happy. I'm glad that I've gone this route because it's been able to help me fulfill all of my other life dreams and aspirations. By all means, remain MGTOW. At the same time, if you're one of the ones where you're really suffering and struggling and you're just experiencing anger and frustration and it's not helping you, then maybe a different strategy is appropriate.
I just realized we did this podcast on International Women's Day. That's pretty funny.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys today, and I'll look forward to catching up with you next week.
Likewise. Take it easy.